Step one is to access the file. So you take this URL and you're going to type it into the URL bar up top. And then once you have access to the folder, you're going to look for this document, the workshop practice example.psd, and come over to the right side and download the file using that button, or click on the three dots and click download. When the pop-up comes up, you're going to look for a location on your machine where you'll remember where the file is. An easy place to save things for this workshop is on the desktop, and then you're going to give it a name and click save. When you first open the document, it should look like this. You'll see a screenshot of the Photoshop user interface layout, as well as a screenshot of the dropdown from the window menu. On the left-hand side, you'll see there are these check marks in the window menu, and you're going to try to match those to the screenshot that's provided here. That's going to make sure that you have the right panels that have the right tools, without giving you a bunch of extra panels with tools that you don't need. Now the panels that you are going to need on the left here is tools. On the top is tool options or options. Then you have swatches on the top right, brushes, and layers. And I've given these panels color-coded boxes that match to the menu so you can tell where everything is. Next, locate the resources folder over here in the layers panel. You're going to find this resources folder. You're going to click on this arrow to open up the folder. That's how you open and close folders in Photoshop. And then you're going to find this visibility icon, this white eye. When you click that, things become visible or invisible. Make the user interface invisible. Next, come to this layer titled Hotkeys and Shortcuts and make it visible. This is going to show you the different shortcuts that can make things easier for you. The most important keys are outlined in red. The ones that you'll use less often I've outlined in green. The easiest shortcuts are the ones for your tools. That's B for brush tool and L for lasso tool. Command D deselects the lasso. Command Z and Shift Command Z are undo and redo. Command plus and minus control to zoom. Next, we'll be looking at the brush sheet. Make the brush sheet visible and the hotkeys invisible. The brush sheet has examples of the behaviors of the different brushes that you can find in the brush folder over here in your brushes panel. And to select one, you can come over to the left side to the toolbar to select your brush tool. You can also use the B button. As you can see, if you highlight here, the B hotkey, B for brush tool. The first brush you're going to want to select is the sketch pencil. We're going to use that for our drawing. And change the size to 15 pixels. The next step is to make the brush sheet invisible and make this Krylon Color Max color sheet visible. Then when you have the brush tool selected, if you hold Option, you see it changes your cursor into this eyedropper tool. We can use that to change the color of the brush by clicking, and you'll notice that the color is applied over here automatically, so I can click the yellow, check my brush, and it's yellow. It's also up here in the recent colors. Next, we need to create a folder for our swatch. So we're going to push this folder button here in the swatches panel and give it a name. Name Spray Paint Workshop. Push OK. Now you have a folder here in the swatches. We're going to start clicking colors using the Option button with our brush, and then push this plus key and then name your colors. Push OK. You're going to want to think about choosing a range of values, dark and lighter colors. You can use different darker colors, different lighter colors, but you're going to want to get some that will fit together in a gradient. I'm choosing to go with a dark blue, a kind of medium blue, and then this kind of light blue-green color here looks good. So I'll add that one in. And now because I have these cool colors, I want to choose maybe like a bright color, a warm color. This orange, for example, could work, so we'll add that into the swatch. And then for the orange, we're also going to want kind of a dark color to shade it with. So I'll go ahead, I'll take this kind of dark red-violet color, we'll add that to the swatch. And that should give us enough colors to work with up here in our swatch. So we're going to go ahead and make the color sheet invisible and then close up the resources folder. Now we have the example material. You can click on this folder here to open it up. Inside are a variety of different layers that show different effects that you can also include with the digital spray paint effects. You can add drawn details, I also have a screenshot that I've incorporated here. You can incorporate a photo texture with some masking. You can incorporate cast shadows and some blend modes. These are a variety of different techniques that you can combine with digital spray paint, but we're only going to go up to the spray paint portion today. When you're done, go ahead and make the example material invisible. Now that we have our colors, we're going to go ahead and start our drawing. So we're going to open up our background folder here and turn on this graph paper grid. And next we want to make sure we have this layer selected, this one that says first draw on this layer. And we're going to make sure we have our brush selected, make sure we have the sketch pencil, we have the right size, 15 pixels. And I'm just going to click and hold and drag my brush across this layer to make a line, and you'll see it's pretty uneven. So I undo with Command Z, and this time I'm going to use Shift to help me. I'm going to click on one point and then I'm going to move my cursor. I'm going to hold down Shift and click, and it's going to automatically connect those points. I'm going to move again, hold Shift, click, move again, Shift, click, move again, Shift, click, and I can just draw the shape this way. This way can result in a little bit of crooked angles depending on how you click. So I'm going to undo it again, and this time instead of Shift clicking, I'm going to actually hold Shift while I draw. So I'm going to click and hold, and then I'm going to press Shift, and then as I drag my brush, it actually holds it to a perfectly perpendicular line. You can do this left or right or up and down. You just start by clicking and holding your brush, press and hold the Shift key, and then drag either left or right or up and down, and it will make perfectly perpendicular lines. So we're going to use these two techniques, the Shift clicking and the holding the Shift while we draw, and we're going to draw ourselves several adjacent or overlapping rectangles. I'm going to pick a few spots on here and draw out some rectangles for myself. Try not to do them all in the same direction. If you draw one that's kind of vertical, draw another one that's horizontal. If you're going to draw yourself a shape that overlaps, choose which shapes are on top and which shapes are on the bottom and draw them that way. It'll save you a step when we're erasing out extra lines. I'm going to give myself another rectangle here, but I'm not going to use it. The next step is optional. You don't have to change your color. If it's helpful, you can do it. I'll do it just because it makes it easier to see the example. But I'm going to choose a different color here. You can see it's different on the side. And then I'm going to pick one of my rectangles and I'm going to bisect it with a line. And I want that line to go all the way through and extend out equally on both sides. I'll do another one here on this rectangle so you can see what it would look like if it's a vertical rectangle. And you see I've got these blue lines now that bisect it. I'm going to go ahead and switch colors again, and then I'm going to draw lines that connect my bisecting line to the corners of the rectangle. And I'm going to do this all the way around, and you only have to bisect one rectangle, but I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate them on both just in case you did yours one way or the other. You can see this line wasn't exactly perfect, so I'm going to use the zoom to undo and then go in and make that line a little bit more precise. I'm going to zoom again, click in the right spots, make sure I'm getting the corners where I want them to be. I'm using my Shift click and I'm just connecting the corners. The next step is to erase out these lines that are no longer necessary. So you can use the eraser tool, and you use that almost the exact same way that you use the brush. You just click and drag. I actually think it's easier if you just keep using the brush. You choose the brush head that you want. I'm going to choose the chisel tip, make it a little bigger, 25 pixels. And when the brush mode is normal, it behaves normally. You click and drag and it makes lines. If you change this brush mode in the options to clear, you can use your brush as an eraser. It's the same head, size, and shape as your brush, and you can change the details. I changed it to 45 here because I think it's a little bit easier to use that angle to get down into the corners as opposed to that perfectly straight rectangle. But it doesn't matter. These lines are only really to give us guidelines for where to paint anyway. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this eraser tool just like I would use the brush. I'm clicking, shift clicking around, and I'm just using that to clear out the lines. You can click and drag and scrub away the line if you want. I think this is a little easier if you just line up the eraser and click and shift click. But then you see I've created this problem here where I drew a line through my blue line. So I'm going to undo and then shift click, and I'm just going to go through here and clean up the rest of these lines. And once you're all done, it should look like this, removing the interior lines. And next step, we go to the lasso. You can find the lasso on the toolbar on the left-hand side. It's this one up here. Yours might look round at first. If you click and hold, you can see the different lassos. You're gonna wanna choose the polygonal lasso. And then you'll see up top there's some lasso options. We use the lasso like we would use masking tape. We just click around and kind of tape off the sections that we want to paint. So I'm gonna start clicking here, and you'll notice once you make the first click with your lasso tool, it's like stuck to your cursor here. So it's gonna stay stuck unless you push escape to cancel it, or unless you finish the loop. If you finish the loop, it goes away, and you finish the loop by either clicking on that original point or by double clicking to automatically close it off from the place where you double click. So I'm going to start clicking a selection, that's what it's called, a selection, around this shape here, all the way around, clicking in the corners, and then I click here to finish the loop. And then you see the selection is marked with this flashing black and white line that goes around. Some people call it marching ants. But basically it just marks the boundary of your selection. And once you have a selection, you can push Command D to deselect, and then you can push Command Z to undo the deselect to get it back again. And now it's time to paint. We're going to paint everything inside of this selection. Push B to switch to your brush tool, then choose a brush. I'm going to choose this heavy cloud brush. I'm going to change the size to 1500 and make it real big. I guess I could do it down at 1000, but you can see it's a little smaller and it might take more passes to kind of sweep over the whole thing. So I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger and put it back up to 1500. It just makes it easier to go over the whole space. Then I'm going to choose this mid-tone blue. I don't want to start too dark or too light. I want to start with this mid-tone. And before we start working, we want to check our layers panel, make sure we have this one second spray paint on this layer. And then I'm just going to take my brush and I'm going to start putting paint down on that layer. I'm using 50% opacity on the brush, which means that if I come back over that area a second time, the paint is going to start to look more like the original mid-tone that we selected. So next I'm going to switch to this spray brush and I'm going to choose a slightly different color. I'm going to choose this color square here on the left, and then I'm going to drag this little circle and adjust it. You can see the new and current. I'm going to look for the difference, and then I'm just going to kind of spray it over. And what that does is it ends up giving a little bit more texture if you're using different brushes. That heavy cloud especially tends to be pretty smooth. You can change the size, you can change the color a little bit, you can choose the different sprays that have the slightly different drop sizes, and that's just gonna make sure that that texture you have looks like spray paint. You can go ahead and turn these lines off to get a better look at your drawing. Toggle the lines. You can toggle the blinking border by deselecting, and then if you need to get it back, you can always use undo to reselect. To start the shading, we're going to return to the lasso tool, and then we're going to look up top at these lasso options. If you hover your mouse over, you can see the names New Selection, Add to Selection, Subtract from Selection, and Intersect with Selection. You want to make sure you have Subtract from Selection, and then we're going to decide which way the light is coming from, either left or right, and whichever side is being hit by the light, we're going to subtract that side out of the selection because we want to focus on painting the shaded side first. So I'm going to take my lasso, I'm going to zoom in here, try to find the corner. You can also start clicking outside and then use that line to kind of locate where it is, because here we are subtracting out. We're not drawing the shape that we want to select. We're drawing a loop around the area we want to subtract. And now you can see the selection has changed and we've subtracted out one area. Now it's time to start shading. We're going to shade this side based on where the light was coming from. So the first thing we're going to do is switch to the brush tool. You can push B. I'm going to use this dense brush here, and then I'm going to choose the darker color for simplicity. You can also choose the mid-tone and then adjust your color manually. Use that new and current window to see the difference and choose a darker color. And you can use that for shading. I'm just going to use this dark blue just to make it easy. And then I'm going to lower my opacity up here in the options down to 20%. And then I'm just going to make a pass over this area and take a look at it. I'm going to deselect real quick, get rid of that border. It's nice, but it's not dark enough. I'm going to make another pass, make it a little darker. And then I'm going to come to this back edge and I'm going to start building up the shadow as a gradient by just passing it over the edge and not across the whole thing. And we're just going to work the shadow up. If it gets too dark, you can always use undo to back the strokes off a little bit and see it a little bit lighter. And then like we did with the midtone, I'm going to build up a little bit of texture by switching to this spray brush and change the opacity. And then I'm going to zoom in so you can see that as I work with this brush, you can kind of see those dark spots coming in, giving it that spray texture. Because that spray 3 brush, it has bigger drops. Now I'm just going to use the zoom and toggle the layers to get a look at my paint, and then move on. Lighting is a very similar process to the shading. We're just going to start by selecting the side where the light is supposed to be interacting. We're going to switch to the lasso and zoom in so we can see where to place that lasso. And then we just start clicking into the corners, tracing down along the edges. With this one, we do want to try and keep the selection pretty tight to the original shape because we are tracing the area we want to paint inside of. Once you're satisfied with your selection, you can go ahead and zoom out and switch over to the brush tool. You can use a spray or a dense brush. I'm going to select the spray brush, and then I'm going to check my size. It's 1000. That looks pretty good. And I'm just going to start building up some light on one side in a gradient the same way we did with the shadow. Just building up the effect that there's some light. And that looks pretty good. But I would prefer to use a more saturated color. That color is looking pretty light, pretty washed out because it's pretty far to the left. I'm going to drag this in, keeping it mostly at the same value, but I'm dragging my color towards saturation, away from the white, towards the bright color. And now you can see when I lay this in, you still get the effect that there's light on one side, but instead of that color being washed out with white, it has this bright, saturated blue color. Now, with what we've learned up to this point, you can finish the rest of it. You can use your lasso and your brush, and you can select around the different squares and paint the rest of it. But there's one more thing that will save you time. When you have a selection, you can actually save that selection and then load it again later to save time. You come up to the top, the select button right here, you go save selection, and then type a name in here, something you'll remember and recognize. And then it's going to save it in these channels. You push OK. And then if you deselect, use Command D to deselect, come back up to the select menu, push load selection. In this channel menu, you go down to the one you named, top block, click it, and you can see that selection comes right back. You can use this as a trick to save you time when you're painting, and I'll explain how you do that as it comes up. I'm going to start by using the lasso to select my other shape here. And then I'm going to save this selection as well. I'm going to name it something recognizable. And then I'm going to go through the same process. I'm going to speed this up here just for time's sake. I'm going to use the midtone, and then I'm going to paint in a shade gradient using that darker red color. And then I'm going to load my selection, reload my selection here. And then instead of having to trace out that light side, I can actually just use the lasso options after loading and just select out, subtract out that area that I don't want, close that loop. And now instead of having to trace all the sides, I only had to do the one side. Makes it much easier, saves time. And then you can see that the orange was pretty bright to begin with. There's not a lot of room in terms of dragging it towards saturation. I would prefer not to just drag it towards white. So another trick is I can kind of drag my hue, and I can slide my hue towards the yellow and use this yellow to create the gradient. Get that kind of nice yellow. And then I'm going to actually switch to a different brush and get more visible splatter. This spray 4 will do it. You can see right along there, get kind of a more visible splatter texture. I'll toggle my lines and take a look at my paint, and that's looking good. So I'll come over here and I'll turn my lines back on. I'm going to switch back to the lasso tool using L, and then I'm going to start clicking my way around this border. Now when I come through the blue, I don't care about the blue because I have the selection saved and I'm going to be able to subtract it out. I'm going to do the same thing with the orange. I'm going to trace close where it matters, but when it gets to the orange, I'm not going to worry about tracing out that corner. Instead, I'm going to use the load selection tool here. Load selection, and then I'll subtract from selection under the operations. I'll pick a top block there, and I'm just gonna do the same thing with the other one. Load selection, subtract from selection, choose the bottom block, and there you can see now both blocks are subtracted out of that middle shape. And then I'm gonna just switch to that red color and start painting. Get a little bit of a light effect here, make it a little bit brighter. In this case, I am dragging a little bit towards white, not too far. It's not so far that it looks too white, but it's not looking quite different enough. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to drag it up towards saturation, and that's a more noticeable lighting effect there. I'm going to toggle these lines here and get a look at my paint, and that'll do it. We don't need to paint the fourth one. Once you've got your painting done and you're ready, it'll be time to save and export your file. When you're done, you're going to want to save, but when you save, you're going to come up here to File, click on the file, get the menu, you can click on Save and Save As. When you save your file, you're saving a Photoshop document. You're not saving the kind of image that you would normally save. Using Save and Save As saves your Photoshop document. Right? If you want an image file for sharing, you want to come to Export and then click Export As. When you click on it, it's going to bring up a pop-up. Now, the pop-up is going to give you options. You can choose a file type, PNG, JPEG. You don't really want GIF. JPEG is usually sufficient. There's also quality. You can drag this up. It changes the file size. You can see 1.7. If I drag it down, it makes the file size smaller. But for printing, you want usually max quality. You can change the width and the height, the pixels, the scale. You don't really want to change the size for this. When you're ready to export, the pop-up comes up. You're going to want to choose a recognizable name, and you're going to note that file tag at the end, JPEG. Look for a location on your machine, in this case, desktop. And then when you're ready, just click Save. When you're finished with the practice and you want to create your own document, you'll start at this beginning screen here with Photoshop. You click on New File, and then in here, don't mess with the presets. You can come in here and choose the size that you want. In your case, I think they're going to be 12 by 18. And then we can change the unit of measurement, make sure it's on inches. Resolution, you want 300 pixels per inch. RGB for color. CMYK will also work, but it's for print. RGB is like computer color. It looks a little brighter. CMYK will show more accurate to what the final printed result will look like. Since I'm working on the computer, I just take the RGB color. Background contents, you can choose a custom color. I usually just leave it white. And then the rest of it, color profile, you don't need that. Click Create, and you've got your document, and you can paint. If you have your own image like a grid or a sketch that you prepared for yourself, you're going to want to import that. It's very simple. Just go to the save location of your file and then drag the file into the document. It might take a second for it to load and adjust to it, but it's going to give it to you. It has this box around to let you know it's selected. It's got its own layer in the layers panel. You can come to the transform tool and you can just drag this thing around. You can also use Command T to get the transform tool, and then from there you can resize it or reposition it on the canvas. I'm just going to hit undo. From there, you're going to need your own layer to paint on and not just the sketch. So you come down here to the layers panel, click on that plus. It's going to give you a new layer. You can toggle your sketch on and off, and you can either paint in the layer on top. I'll go ahead and name this painting. And you can either paint in the layer that's on top, or you can take the sketch, put it on top, and drag down the opacity. You can also change the blend mode to multiply or something. And that's really it. After that, you're ready to paint.